right.
Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Rubin from the Pinole Historical Society, and it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to our first online Zoom program. And our guest today is Dyana So. She is a 2012 graduate of Pinole Valley High School, a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, and is currently studying for her degree in business history and global markets at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. And we welcome her where right now it is 3 minutes after 8 on Saturday morning. So welcome, Dyana.
Thank you. It's really such a pleasure to be here. All right, so without further ado, I guess I'll get started and share my screen. And let's see. Can you guys all see my screen here? Well, Jeff, how about you confirm for me, because I know you're the one.
I can see the screen.
Great. So, and you see the full screen at this moment?
Yes.
Great. All right, so first Zoom meeting for the Pinole History Museum. It's quite an honor, first and foremost. But I also think that the beautiful irony in many regards, despite the coronavirus, is that it's made me even closer to Pinole. I've spent several in the past weeks. Oh, it looks like we have 2 people in the waiting room. So Jeff, I'll let you take care of that.
Yeah, I'll let him in.
Sure. So as I was saying, that despite the horrible pandemic that's touching all of us in different parts of the world, it's interesting that it also is bringing a lot of people together. And in my case, I had not been talking to Jeff so much, had it not been for the last few weeks. And it's been fun to watch Jeff also get more comfortable with Zoom and also exchanging a lot of ideas. Right. And actually gives me a lot of hope about the way that we can actually connect to our hometowns, even when we're very, very far away. So I actually want to start off with a lot of thanks, but not just, and there will be plenty of thanks to go around throughout the rest of the presentation, but I think thank you for this opportunity. I don't mind being the guinea pig to share my story here, but I do think it's also quite unique to have such a platform to just share a story. I wouldn't necessarily call myself the stereotypical successful person. Granted, I think success is a very subjective term and very relative to the context. But what I mean by that is, I'm still only surpassing the first quarter of my life. And so there's still many more years to go. But that being said, I am deeply humbled to have the chance to reflect even on that front, to share some of my experiences, and hopefully to whatever extent that it inspires anyone from Pinole and will find it of interest. I also want to say congratulations, of course, to the class of 2020 graduates. Don Gosney, who's also attending the session, I know. He's actually also watching the graduation for the middle college high school students. It's a busy month in May, and it's such a shame that such an important time in one's life, they can't really celebrate it. So I did want to acknowledge that as well. All right, so let's start things off. I was born in 1994 in Hong Kong. I am here on the bottom right with my cousins. And it wasn't until 2000 that me and my father and my grandfather, we moved to Pinole. It was purely by happen chance, actually, because my father found work at Foster Freeze. And it was because of that, and then finding a home in Pinole, that I ended up going to first grade and starting out there. So I am a product of public school in Pinole from 1st to 12th grade, Collins to Pinole Valley High School. Here I am with 2 of my very close friends from high school, Aaron Miller and Ayana. And then after that, I went to Penn, where after graduating, I ended up being an admissions officer for the University of Pennsylvania. This is first my quick road trip down a little bio, and I'll go into some more details later on. But I decided to stay and work in Penn to be a Penn admissions officer for about 2.5 years, of which was a very really rewarding time, because I was assigned to Central California, from San Jose down to Santa Barbara. So I actually had plenty of opportunities to return home. And then after 2.5 years, I got a full scholarship from the European Commission to get my master's degree, which Jeff already introduced. And you can see here that I was surrounded by a bunch of suitcases. The truth behind this photo is only the green and the gray bag is mine. The black bags are my friend, but it was to share with our friends internally of just our life at this moment. Everything was uprooted. I sold or donated or threw everything I owned in Philadelphia that I had accumulated this time at this point then. And where I am now is Rotterdam, Netherlands. And this is a view from my flat since quarantine has happened. It's been it's been a refuge and a blessing in disguise in many ways, because although a lot of us still have thesis to finish, this is where we are finding our comforts. So because I know we have quite an international audience with us tonight, and some people in the Zoom meeting who have never actually been to Pinole, this is the distance that we are talking about here. So it's great to be connecting with all of you, despite it being 3 o'clock in the morning. Seeing all of you here and this occasion definitely energizes me to share a lot more. And all those other yellow stars are places I've been to. So I'm going to get right into sort of telling you a bit about what Pinole was like through my eyes. I lived here essentially from 1st to 12th grade, as I had mentioned, and some of you who are from Pinole probably recognize this particular place. So for me, Pinole was shaped by my parents working in Vietnamese BT deli, or my mom, and my dad working in Foster Freeze. And these two places were places I frequented growing up. And although my parents are working, and even right now they're working, and as a result unable to attend the Zoom meeting, I know that they will very much look forward to the recorded version. I am very humbled that through their hard work in many ways, they supported me and really just asked that I do the best I can in my own job, which is to do well in school. And for me, Pinole was also a place that was full of traditions that I looked forward to, whether that was the car show or it was the lighting of the Christmas tree. And also just starting to meet with friends that I've met through middle school onwards and actually getting more involved with making film. Pinole, despite it was a place where there was a lot of possibilities to start things or engage in a local community setting, I would say, looking back. But overall, I would say that the public schools were really the centers of gravity in Pinole. And this picture here is actually of Collins Elementary School. And even though I don't come back to Pinole as often as I should, and only when I had the opportunity, whether that was because of work or in between school, I do often frequent sometimes the campuses of Collins Elementary or even Pinole Middle and Pinole High School. Even though both Pinole Middle and Pinole High School have since, the campuses I knew have since been replaced by really beautiful new renovated campuses. Obviously, it was in school that a lot of friendships were made, a lot of experiences, but also opportunities. On the top left, where you see a lot of the students and a student jumping up on the corner right there, that's actually from a hiking club that was arranged by one of our history teachers in middle school. On the top right, it's homecoming. Bottom right was calculus class just before class got started. And then on the bottom left was forensics. And I do like to acknowledge that Pinole Valley and Pinole Middle School in particular, especially as a young person was developing, they did offer a lot of opportunities to connect even back in my time. And every so often I do look at the newsletters or the Facebook pages or sometimes the social media channels of which we never had when we were back in Pinole Valley High School, for example. The students remain active, and I think that fine balance where they have allowed students to engage is extremely important, because this is where a lot of those friendships are nurtured. But at the same time, I also got more involved with history. On one hand, I did do a project about the history of Pinole Valley High School, and in hindsight, in putting this presentation together, I actually realized that it meant a lot to me to do that history work, because when an opportunity came up for me to be the editor-in-chief of the yearbook, I wanted to take it on, in part because I did want to spend my final year of Pinole looking back on Pinole Valley's history, and also understanding the high school. But at the same time, I also wanted to pick up a camera and really kind of adopt more of a journalistic perspective to understand Pinole Valley. And here is a picture, one of my favorite photos that I've taken in that year, because I used to be part of the marching band, and it was a very difficult thing to remove myself from at the time, in my 16-year-old mind of my universe. But at the same time, it was a blessing because I had 7 years of being in band from Pinole Middle to Pinole Valley High School, and to take a step back and really just watch the culture unfold as an insider-outsider in many ways allowed me to see other perspectives, such as taking portraits of different students and in essence kind of becoming a member of certain clubs or groups that I never really had a chance to be a part of, and really seeing Pinole Valley from different angles in my last year, which was quite a gift. So another huge aspect I have to definitely commend in my time at Pinole Valley High School was the Ivy League Connection program, which at this moment is no more, but essentially for those of you who have never heard of it, it was a very special program that granted high school students, top performing high school students in our school district, which wasn't very well performing, the opportunity to have a full ride scholarships to attend some kind of summer college at an Ivy League or private institution that offered such a program. For some of the people in my audience who are also Penn alum, you guys are aware of some of those programs. But for me, as a sophomore at the time, I'll be very honest, I actually had never even heard of what Ivy League schools were. And so it was a pretty steep learning curve. But ever since 2010, when I went to Cornell University for the summer college on political science, to put it very shortly, it just rocked my world. And it was my first time, I think, flying domestically in the United States, but also seeing the East Coast, and the summertime is absolutely beautiful there. And then I had the opportunity to apply again and got into the Studies and Grand Strategies program at Yale. And that too was a very formative experience. Academically, probably one of the most challenging things I had ever done, but it really primed me at that crucial moment of my junior year to think critically about where did I want to go in the future. And, from that, I ended up going to Penn. I only applied to Penn, and through a lot of help from the ILC, I had the chance to, I got admitted, and the rest is history. In this part, I also wanted to pay some time to really thank a lot of the teachers and mentors and adults who have been a part of my life in some form or another. And this very list here, from Collins to Pinole Valley High School, in addition to the Ivy League connection, was purely from just my own mind, as in I didn't really have to open up any books or yearbooks or go on the internet. So I think the profound effect that these various teachers have had in my life is I feel so lucky, in fact, I think it's hard to express sometimes, because I am also very well aware that I wish every student, had this to claim, this experience. And many of these teachers, for example, recommended me to programs as early as 6th grade for writing. And this was not because I, or my parents especially, they didn't know much about what was out there. So for me to trust in them, and them to trust in my abilities to recommend things, I think, speaking as older Dyana to younger Dyana, it was deeply, deeply appreciated. And this picture is of Mr. Wade. I actually took this picture while as a yearbook photographer when he was teaching class, and he let me sit in and also take pictures of his students. So in this section, I'm just going to talk a little bit about my time in Penn and Philly, because I did want to focus more on my time now in Europe. But for those who might be curious, and also the link between how Pinole has influenced essentially my time in Penn and Philly. So the curiosity that really was cultivated at Pinole Valley High School continued while I was at Penn. I have to say I was on a high note, I think, in my senior year. I felt very much like I had learned a lot. I felt I was surrounded by a group of people who supported me, and I just felt like I was ready to conquer Penn. But as my friends from Penn can also attest, like Penn is like many Ivy League universities, it is beyond many of us, right? As in, we're going to enter some of the most challenging experiences, brushing shoulders with other students who were also at the top of their class. So, it was also a leveling platform in many ways. But I think that the humble start I had helped to keep me sane in these regards. And one of the aspects of the curiosity while I was in Penn was that I picked up new sports and new hobbies, because one of the beautiful things I think about going into a new place is the opportunity to transform yourself and to push the limits of your interests. And this is kendo. For those of you guys who are unaware, this is Japanese fencing. I took this on my first year and I absolutely loved it. I love the discipline. I love the communities. The people who are in this team are like my brothers and sisters to me. And I've been doing this since 2012. Although the current dojo is far away and due to quarantine, I cannot go to the one in Rotterdam. I also continued to nurture my creativity a lot while I was at Penn. I picked up a lot of side jobs, whether that was as a graphic designer or continuing photography. And in retrospect, it was very formative for why I ended up choosing my major in visual studies, which is an interdisciplinary major between art history, art, psychology, and philosophy as well. And Penn, of course, being an Ivy League school with many resources, also opened doors and opportunities to see parts of the world I had not considered before. And one of them was actually going to Israel and Palestine in the summer of 2014 and 15, the first time for an internship on Israeli news and technology, because I wanted to explore the career, but at the same time there was a scholarship to offer. And then the second time I went back was for my thesis. So you can kind of see where the global bug, the travel bug, was already starting to hit and where this originated from. Furthermore, towards the end, I also had the honor of being selected to give a speech, a 60-second lecture, as Penn had done, about the research I was doing with my thesis, but also thanks to the connection I had with my public speaking coach, a program that I had also gotten involved in. And to me, when I look at this picture, for example, and think about the memory of this day, it reminds me that, there were so many times, I think, at Penn where I struggled with whether I belong, because imposter syndrome does happen often. And it wasn't until I think I went to Penn that I started to understand and get to know concepts such as being a first-generation student and what that meant. Stubbornly, of course, I wanted to take that with stride and think that, coming from a first-generation background is not a disadvantage, but an advantage. And in case you weren't aware what that term meant, first generation, it meant that no one, and you're the first in your family to go to college, and what that implied. Because going to an Ivy League school, particularly, a lot of the students do come from families with a lot of connection. And I can distinctly remember that as early as my freshman year, I was a bit embarrassed that I didn't understand what the profession consulting or engineering actually entailed. Of course, now as an admissions officer, later on, I can tell you more about that, but I'm not surprised if some people are still confused about what the consulting profession is, because it is still a very confusing profession. But anyways, by 2012, I did graduate, and with honors from visual studies, a very proud moment. My mom flew in along with my dad, but for my mom, it was her first time in Philly and seeing the Penn campus. Fun fact, it was also the year that Tiffany Trump graduated, so there was a lot of security at the graduation ceremony. So after Penn, there was an opportunity to become an admissions officer. And to be very honest with you, I didn't give much thought into what I wanted to do right after uni. Part of it was because I needed to recover from writing the thesis. It was academically a lot to think about. But at the same time, I love the city of brotherly love. I think I really was attracted to a place that had really grown to me, a big city. And so I stayed, and for me, in retrospect, it was a really good opportunity, because there I also got more involved with the city. For example, working with film festivals there, helping to watch short films, or just in general networking and getting to know myself as a young professional in that environment. And because as I had mentioned, I was able to read applications from Central California as an admissions officer, it gave me a lot of time to go home. And every time I had a chance to go back to Pinole, I would go back to California. I would always make an effort to return to Pinole. And a tradition started with me and my father just walking around Pinole shores. And that was from one of those visits. So I also wanted to add that despite Penn, Philly, I'm starting to scale, away from the town that I grew up in. But I always felt a desire to reconnect with Pinole, even though a lot of my friends had moved out of state, or they stayed, but they were in different parts of California because, let's say, they went to the state schools. But I also found that it was an opportunity to connect with friends who weren't super close, but it reopened the opportunity to connect. And here is my friend Artone. We actually did the history of Pinole Valley High School together back in our junior year, and he invited me to go check out a part of Pinole that I had never seen. And he says, "Let's go watch the sunrise." And I love that an opportunity to come home, because it's a bit rare, does open those opportunities to connect with friends. And for that reason, I'm extremely open to grabbing coffee with people from around town, because the more the merrier, I say, with especially friendships. So this might lead you to wonder up to this point, like, why did you leave Europe again? It sounds like you were, having a really good time in Philly. You were doing meaningful work as an admissions officer representing the state that you came from. Yes, but at the same time, my response to that was why not? I think there was always this burning curiosity. The theme does not leave this presentation. That was still always with me. And furthermore, there was always a set of books that started to pile up next to my desk alongside the spreadsheets that I was also keeping track of. And I think that there was just an underlying unmet need still. And I think that from experience, I know that this was an indication I needed to look outwards. And I'm really happy that Jade is actually in this presentation, because she is one of my really close friends. And in our senior year together, she recommended I look into the Erasmus Mundus programs, because they had an opportunity to do documentary film work in Europe. And that was my passion at the time. It has since changed, but since that conversation, I did bookmark the opportunity. And when that restlessness came up in me again 2.5 years later, I did start to look back at programs. I felt the itch to go travel. I wanted to see Europe, and I was also very curious to understand what was going on outside of the American perspective, because that was all I had known. Sure, I grew up in Hong Kong up until I was about 3, but that was so long ago. And with the encouragement and the chance meeting with one of my former thesis advisors, because I was at Penn and he was, of course, there because he teaches there, he mentioned that his daughter had done an Erasmus Mundus program. And with that very positive encouragement, and also the endorsement of readily wanting to write a letter of recommendation for me there, it just kind of sealed the deal for me to do a double take on these programs. And I selected 2, and I actually applied and got in. So going local in Europe is where the rest of the story will take me. And here is a picture from New Year's Day in Genoa, Italy. In many ways, this picture represents not just Europe for me, but also what I study, because here you can see that there is globalization happening in terms of like shipyards and the distance. But Genoa is historically such a crucial city in Italian commerce and also European commerce back in the times of merchants. And so this is a perspective that I'm really grateful to have gotten. I mean, I'm still working out a lot of it, but there's a reason for why this picture was chosen. So a bit about this program, because it can be a bit confusing. It's already quite a mouthful as it is, because the full name is Global Markets, Local Creativities. Iris, who's also in this attending this presentation, she is a classmate of mine. She's joining us from Taiwan. And the European Commission has essentially allotted several scholarships for a few students for this program. And there are two different pathways. The one that I'm currently doing is on creative industries, while we have 20 other peers who are doing the one towards development. But as the title of the master's program suggests, global markets, local creativities, it's essentially understanding the bigger picture and the smaller picture. I'll go into details shortly. But as an example to illustrate the program I am on, we first start off in this highly mobile program at the University of Glasgow, or Glasgow, as they like to say. It's English, but it sounds like a different language sometimes out there. I spent fall and winter of 2018 centered around the social and political sciences department. They're starting off with a lot of classes on the globalized economy. Then me and my classmates, all 47 of us, went down to beautiful sunny Barcelona, where we spent our winter to our spring there, mostly from the business program, but we had very engaging classes from emerging industries, in addition to consultancy projects that we did with the local cities there. And finally, Iris and I are actually both in this program within an Erasmus University of Rotterdam, in the History, Culture, and Communications department, which more so streamlines our education towards the creative industries and cultural sectors. But I think one of the biggest takeaways, of course, of Global, and I think Iris can also attest to this, is the fact that we have 47 individuals there from 21 different nationalities. It's a highly diverse and international cohort. And in my opinion, it's probably one of the most international environments I've ever had. The interaction there is priceless. Sure, we have the added layer of being able to travel ourselves and live and claim to live in these different beautiful European cities, but it's the dialogues that we have and the culture exchanges that we have there. And in case you didn't see me, I'm on the right-hand side of this photo. So to go a little deeper into, these are pages from one of my notes, into like globalization, what is it that you study? A lot of us will struggle to explain it to you, but the best way I've come to understand it is really understanding the different scales of the local, regional, and global influences that shapes perspectives of essentially everything in our present world. One example I'll give you to help you better understand an aspect of what I studied was a class on global cities. We were asked to write a final paper about one global city and argue for why it was. And one of the readings we had encountered was about ordinary cities, and arguing that we should stop looking at all these big cities as primary examples of what it means to be a global city, especially when you really look at the details of what is made up of a local urban place. And that got me thinking about Pinole. So I did end up writing my final paper about Pinole and delving into the research of interviewing a few people who lived in Pinole, including Jeff, and then incorporating some of those theories. It was a fantastic way to not only apply the theories, but also practice. And I will say that throughout my global education, even though it's still young, a 2-year program, it has really allotted for that chance to be creative and interject what you want to make out of this overarching degree program. Of course, there were a lot of opportunities to travel in between. So there was a good balance between, of course, doing a lot of schoolwork, but seeing different places. Here, I joined several students at the Isle of Skye. Fun fact was that the people leading this tour were also my landlords while I was in Scotland. So I got really lucky because they gave me discounts to go on some of the trips that they hosted. I kind of regret never going to the trip to go see the Hogwarts Castle, but maybe I'll have a chance to if assuming travel restrictions loosen, because my graduation will be this December 2020 back in the University of Glasgow, where we all started our education. Of course, also during the trip, not the trip, but the global experience meant that I was also living through history. Here, while I was going to visit a friend in Paris, it was right at the continuation of the Yellow Vest movement. So while it was a beautiful time, my first time in Paris, it was also quite a historical moment to be seeing the protests at certain parts of the city. So it didn't get violent, in case you were wondering where it was, because they would often be centered at certain areas. But it was quite interesting to see you know, the gap between what we see in media to reality in front of you. I also had the chance to engage in some of the internships, and one of the ones that I did invited me out to go to the Global Investigative Journalism Conference in Hamburg, Germany. Here I'm at the headquarters of Der Spiegel, which is one of the main news headquarters in Germany. So that was very formative as an experience. And culturally also got to engage with other locals, my classmates, to experience different aspects of culture. And here we have Carnival here in Maastricht, just before coronavirus actually hit all of us. I think I see a couple of, chats, questions. So I'm going to go into those questions shortly after this presentation, but please do keep them coming. I see them coming in on the chat, but not reading them in detail. But yeah, these three are some of my classmates, and we all got dressed up thanks to Misha, who's the classmate on the left here in the wig. His mom is a drama teacher, and so she had plenty of costumes that we could wear, and it was just fun to have a chance to go south of Rotterdam and experience local culture there. All right. Okay. Oh, and here, you know, you might be wondering, okay, this is really scaling up to this continental European scope here. How is this at all connected to Pinole? Well, actually, there are some, you wouldn't believe it, but out in Europe, it can be quite a small world. And I did have 4 particular experiences meeting with people from the East Bay. I met with my very good friend Erin on the top left in Dublin, Ireland, to celebrate my first Thanksgiving overseas with her because she had a work trip that brought her out. Erin herself is also a graduate at Pinole Valley High School. She's the drum major in yellow from the photo. And she also did the Ivy League connection as well, but from a different program. On the bottom right is Joe Bell, who's from Hercules High School, but he also did ILC, Ivy League connection as well. And we met up because he was wrapping up his studies, I believe, out in Europe, and he was kind of doing a grand tour before he headed back, and I believe he's back in the East Bay now. Donna, who's also in this meeting right now, I had the fortune of connecting with her thanks to Sue Khan, who was my principal back in Pinole Valley High School. And it turns out that Donna and Sue were best friends at Richmond High School. And so just the fact that I was connected to Sue on Facebook and she knowing that I was in Netherlands just led to this really lovely occurrence where I was able to get to know Donna up to the point, of course, where coronavirus happened. And I know Donna now is back in California for the time being. And on the left, Lawrence, who is 1 year older than me, graduated from Pinole Valley High School. He works in the Navy now, and their ship docked in Marseille right when I was still studying in Barcelona. It was just basically a country away, and so I thought, why not? Let's make it a trip and catch up in Marseille. But it just really goes to show you that, yeah, it can be quite a small world sometimes, and those moments are so special because it really makes you realize that, you know, people in Pinole do go around, and it's really fun to connect to people overseas. So to conclude in my presentation, I did do some reflection thinking about how exactly did Pinole really shape me to become the person that I am. And I formulated it to a series of a few life lessons. And I kind of directed it with a thought of giving it to someone who was younger than me, who was possibly a high school student, but of course it could potentially be applicable to a lot of people. And in retrospect, I also think that a lot of the things I will share now can be helpful for myself and maybe to you in times of quarantine, in other words, in times of uncertainty. So I would say that one of the first things is that unconditional support will always bring you home. This is a picture with my family. What I mean by this saying is that whether that unconditional support comes from your family or your friends or a city that you know has got your back and supports you, it means that you will always ingrain some aspect to that person that will always want to come home for it, if especially a really important occasion comes up. And for me, at this time last year, around this time exactly, actually, my younger brother, Andrew, he was graduating from UC Santa Barbara, and I wouldn't miss it for anything. So even though I could have stayed in Barcelona longer with a lot of my friends, to me, this was absolutely important, and I had to be there for that. There's always a lot out there to see. Just never forget how it all started. I think, especially with all my connections with Pinole, the Ivy League connection, no pun intended, but a lot of the people who I remember so fondly, it's definitely ingrained, at least in me, the sense that as someone who's so curious, who wants to travel a lot, I'm always motivated to look outwardly, but it doesn't mean that I'm not always thinking about, well, how does this go back to my origins? How does it go back to places that really cultivated this curiosity? Because it just doesn't come from nowhere. I'm a huge believer that although nature is one aspect, as in who you just are as a person is a huge aspect to your own becoming, I do believe too that nurture plays such a big part. And if it wasn't for that, I don't think I would care so much to come back to Pinole. As in, my parents, of course, is like a big part, but there's something a lot more about this community that really strikes me. Friendliness is a language spoken everywhere. I think it starts for me in Pinole, because when I think back on all the mentors that inspired and all the friends that I've enjoyed my time with, I really can't say I have a lot of negative experiences from my childhood in Pinole. And for that, it reminds me that it was probably from those experiences that lead me to be the friendly person that I am also when I travel. Part of it is also my personality probably, but I think that this reminder is that if ever you want to go anywhere, as long as you are able to be friendly and open, people respond to that. And at least for me, it has also opened a lot of doors unexpectedly, because it's an unconditional type of friendliness that I'm talking about, not so much the type of networking with a capital N, you know. And here, this is actually from the Women's Day March, and it was possible because my flatmate wanted to go out, and we all decided to do that. I also wanted to add that many extraordinary people can come from an ordinary place. And this is quite a story, not too long though. So while I was in admissions, I also was exploring other professional opportunities at the time. The journalism interest came back, and I had the invitation to go to the Asian American Journalism National Conference, which was held in Philadelphia. And while there, at the final reception dinner, I somehow ended up talking to this woman who asked me where I came from. And I said to her, well, I came from a town you probably never heard of in California. It's Pinole. And she goes, Pinole? That's where my colleague comes from, and he's getting an award tonight. And I'm like, my eyes just lit up, right? I was like, what, you've heard of Pinole, and what, there's someone who's getting an award? How did I not know about this? So this person is Ryan Yamamoto. He is now a Seattle-based journalist, and the story isn't over. The second part to the story, of course, I ended up talking to him and gushing, and that's why this photo got taken. But the second part of the story is that I met his father before by interviewing him for the documentary me and my classmates did about the history of Pinole Valley High School. His father used to be a drafting teacher at Pinole Valley High School back when such a class existed. So small world, full circle moment there. And to me, that experience doesn't only acknowledge that, yes, extraordinary people can come from a seemingly ordinary place, but I also want to acknowledge the fact that a lot of the people who graduated from my class, they're doing amazing things, not just in my class directly, but also the classes subsequently. So there's a lot of great people who have come from this city, and I think that is, I don't have like an answer for what specific formula comes from Pinole, but there's an energy, and I think that's awesome. Resiliency cannot be taught, only learned. This one is quite important because I think a lot of the skills that one might assume going to university or college can teach us, yes, while the classroom can teach us a lot, I think coming from a largely working class city, from my own personal background, with both of my parents never going to college and working in the food industry, it has taught me a lot about the value of overcoming challenges and not taking it so hard. As in, there's a lot more out there, a lot more serious things out there, a lot more people who might be struggling in ways more unimaginable than you. And the thing about these types of experiences that really toughen you up and make you able to conquer uncertainties, such as the ones we're experiencing now, a lot of that is attributed to what you experience and not so much from what you can read from a book or a how-to video. So Pinole, in many ways, a mix of the people who live there and with whom I got to engage with, they did instill that in me as well. Everything will fall into place in hindsight. I think this is more of an advice to myself at this moment, but in many ways, in the sense that, you know, I'm graduating now, and like many graduates in the class of 2020, we're entering into a very uncertain labor market. But while we can spend a lot of time stressing out about how to plan for uncertainty, we also can take solace in reflecting on how, in the end, how we end up telling that narrative of how we overcame or succeeded is in hindsight. And so part of why I think I embrace so much of the curiosity and go with the flow aspect of myself is because I look forward to telling the narrative after the fact. And I hope that especially, and this is me now speaking more as a former admissions officer, working with young people who are even more stressed, I would say, this generation than I was when I was applying to university, is that there's so many other ways to go about your success. And this might sound a bit ironic because, you know, I went to an Ivy League school, I represent an Ivy League school, and yes, they're great, but you have to find a fit that works best for you. And more importantly, how that story of your life is supposed to unfold, it's told afterwards. So in the moment, what best fits you in the present, that's what you really should be aiming for, not what other people are doing. And lastly, and connected to Pinole History Museum, one in particular, history is the stories we tell. This is a picture from the archaeological site of Uthina, Tunisia. Through a friend I met in Philadelphia, he invited me to his family home to visit Tunisia, which is my first time on the African continent, actually. So very rewarding experience for me. But this picture is very representative because despite it being an archaeological site, it's not been really well studied yet. So it's yet to be told. So it's kind of exciting. And what I mean from my advice here about history is the stories we tell is that, building off of the last point, the stories, its history is always a narrative. There's always an intentionality behind it. And now that I'm getting my master's in history, global history, and also history, business history, what is the intention behind sharing the story? The idea, for example, of having a history museum to me is a participatory effort, because traditionally lots of histories were written by people who had motives to categorize or understand how events unfolded from their perspective. And by what I mean by we tell, as you can see now on social media, everyone's participating and documenting things, but it's the intention to curate, it's the intention to think about who to include. If you feel the voice isn't a voice isn't heard, it's so much of it is about whether or not if you don't hear your voice being heard, you speak, you demand to be heard. And I think that that is an element of the historical practice that is changing, and one I find very exciting, and one I look forward to seeing unfold with the History Museum in particular. So you might be wondering at this point, what's next for me? Jeff wanted me to talk about this, but I would say that it's a bit hard right now because I had already alluded with the labor market being very uncertain. But, you know, there's also a part of me that's relatively calm at the face of these. I mean, I won't be in Rotterdam for too long. I do plan to stay around Europe at least until my graduation, because geographically it makes the most sense not to be flying around, whether or not it would be too pricey to fly around. I had intentions of doing my master's in creative industries because I did hope to transition professionally there. But at the same time, I'm enjoying my thesis work so much, understanding the creative agencies and advertising industry, and how these agency spaces cultivate the creative culture that makes us successful in a notoriously volatile market and industry, that I might also consider getting a PhD. So if that happens, we'll see, but that would be at least a 4-year journey, and likely from Europe. But I know, for example, that I have no issues with returning home. In fact, I think I have a very good problem, and I don't take that for granted. So for the time being, it's a lot of uncertainty, I would say, up until the end of 2020. But I look forward to sending an update once I know what's going on. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much for listening, and also in light of quarantine, that for you to choose the time to spend with me and hear my story, I really appreciate it, and that I wish you much strength and health as we all continue to ride out this pandemic together. On my end, Rotterdam is slowly starting to open up, but I think the people are also a bit apprehensive because of the second wave that could happen. But yeah, so thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now and delve right into Q&A.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions. So can you see them in the chat area?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so Charles has the first one.
Yes.
If you'd all like to put yourself back on camera so we can see all of you.
It's nice to see everyone's faces. Hello, and hello to some of the new people who joined in, including my mom. Hi, Mom. She's Queenie, by the way. That's awesome. So yes, first question from Charles. Can you provide us the transition program called PenCap? I recall that you participated in it since you were first in your family to attend college. Can you explain the benefits of PenCap? Yes, and the pre-freshman program. So most Ivy League schools, in addition, have some kind of pre-freshman program, but they're often quite selective. And the one that I did participate in was PenCap. Essentially, it is selective, but the idea is that you let high school students attend Penn a week in advance so that they have a chance to understand what's expected of them. So it's not just let us show you campus and put you in a dorm for a week, but it's really putting them in a classroom to start to familiarize them to the rigors of what Penn is asking for, but at the same time also starting to build these important first bonds. A lot of the friends that I met at PenCap to this day are close friends, and I think that that is such a crucial sort of starting net, this intentionality of putting certain students together. If there are other people who are interested in this program, I'm more than happy to share more information about that. To my knowledge, the program is still happening, and that is only for those students who have already been admitted to Penn. Next question. Let's see, this one's from Donna. Aside from people when you came at Pinole, what do I find that I miss the most? And also, as a Chinese American, what are some of the reactions or questions you get from people outside of the US during your travels? Oh, very nice questions. Okay, so first one, what do I miss a lot? You know, it's the little things. It's like the farmer's market for me, or just I really just miss eating with my family. I think whether that's just going to King Valley, that's like their that's like the place they like to go to often. But for me, because I don't do that, I believe it or not, don't actually speak Cantonese to anybody else but my parents and my and the people in my family. So it's like a very niche cultural experience for me to have that. As for one of the reactions I get as a Chinese American outside the US, particularly in Europe, I would say, sometimes I get comments like, wow, your English is so good. And I think that comes from people who don't have a lot of Asians, or they assume that they're Dutch, for example, but then they're like, wow, you are an American from, like, they haven't really pieced that together. But I will say, especially I'm very colored by the current coronavirus issue, and I'm very glad that despite this, there hasn't been a lot of racism, if at all, that I've personally experienced, and I'm extremely grateful for that, because of course, this is only, of course, speaking from a personal feeling, but you know, even when I sneeze in public out of allergies, there's so much pollen right now happening in springtime Rotterdam. It makes me self-conscious because I don't want other people to feel worried. I'm also worried, of course, that I already had, like, that is a reaction from coronavirus, not allergies. But I think that that is something that, you know, is in our psyche. And I have felt very welcomed, actually, in all the 3 cities that I've been to. Also, the Chinese food from the different diasporas, that I've been across from Glasgow, Barcelona to even Rotterdam have been excellent. So wherever you go, you'll likely find great Chinese food. Let's see, from Estella, what can you share about the level of cultural diversity in other parts of the world you visited versus the Pinole area? How do you think that diversity can shape and influence the young folks from this area? Oof, really good question. So this is something I've thought about a lot because first, I think growing up in the Bay Area, we kind of take diversity for granted. And I mean this in a good way, because I'll be very honest, as teenagers, we would make fun of each other's backgrounds, but it was all out of fun and games. But now I would say we're very much in this PC culture. And at Penn, meeting different people from different parts of the United States alone, you start to get into niches, as in the Asian American community and the Black American community. And I thought it was very enriching, though, to have these spaces because they were always open. So I did spend time, 2 years at Penn, actually, the last 2, living in the African American historic dormitories, actually, that was like, that mostly group. But also did a lot of work with the Asian American community. But the problem sometimes with that is that we can get siloed, and we, although get super into our own cultures, we forget that we also need to bridge that gap. In Europe, a lot of the hyphen American context started to fall apart for me. And it was sometimes a bit frustrating because obviously from my appearance, people assume I'm from China or some other part of Asia. Then I speak and they're like, oh, she's American. But the nuances of that gets lost. And at first it was a bit frustrating. And I've had conversations like this with my Asian classmates who were from Asia and of course speaks fluently in English, but were raised there in Asia. And, you know, sometimes we struggle because we were like, when people approach us and have these assumptions, do you find it to be racist? And over time, I've come to accept that even the very curious Uber driver in Glasgow, for example, that immediately asked me where I'm from, I've come to kind of lower my guns a little bit and be less defensive and start to accept that, you know, reading tone into it and really acknowledging that maybe it comes from a place of curiosity and that it's not as high stakes. But I think Europe has actually been really good for me to step outside of the American bubble to consider what it means to be diverse and curious and open to conversing in that way. As for how I think it can influence young people in this area particularly, I think sometimes we can take for granted easily in the Bay Area that it's so diverse, but even then it's just one microcosm of diversity. There's more out there. And I think sometimes the issue with only leaning on the diversity from the East Bay is you assume that's what diversity only means. So we need to also see the diversity of other diversity. So from Michael, you've had the opportunity to visit many different cities in a variety of different cultural contexts. Is there anything you notice about the ways of life in these communities that are shared among the different parts of the world? Yes. So, gosh, this one's really hard because there are convergences and divergences, but you know, one thing that does stand out to me is that friendliness as a language spoken everywhere, it really resonates because I decided, for one example, when I was looking for rent in all of these different cities, I chose not to go for the ones offered by the university because I wanted to live with locals. And I have found that despite, you know, diving straight into Facebook groups or an app dedicated to finding housing, that my expectations or stereotypes of cultures of different people really evaporated. I just operated as I normally would and how I would like to be treated. And it has actually benefited me and has not been a problem. And I think that is one of my is the best way I can come to answer that question of when you go to different places, what are those similarities? People are nice. I think community in every, especially major city, that's very curious about interacting with people from outside, and they're everywhere. I think that knowing that that's out there, I mean, now with coronavirus, of course, it's harder to see that, but I think that is really great that there's always kind of some part of many different parts of the world where you can really experience global citizenry. And when you are among those kinds of people, and the Global program is a prime example of this, it really feels like the borders dissolve. And I don't mean that in a kumbaya, like, oh, the world is all like united way, but it really, I think, shows, especially now that I've studied global history of the history of globalization, that we've come a very far way along to understand what having some kind of global consciousness can mean, and the barriers of cultural differences starts to diminish, in my opinion. Yes, and I think that's it for questions. I hope I didn't take up too much. I'm 2 minutes over for my 4 a.m.
You can stay on as long as you like.
Probably need to sleep at some point, but
You did take a nap, didn't you?
I did.
Yes.
I tried, and then I kept thinking about what I was going to say, and then I kind of didn't sleep at all. But I'm absolutely awake at this point, so I hope I was coherent and your connections were okay. It's always a bit tricky talking during, thank you for thumbs up, I appreciate it, Joanne. Tricky just talking at the computer, but it's the brave new world, I suppose, that we're all going through. Thank you, Jay and Teresa. But yeah, I sincerely, it's great that somehow this is the most engaged I've been with Pinole in a while. And I mean, I don't wish for a terrible pandemic to be the reason that connects all of us together, but I'm hoping maybe this could be the start of other ways that we can engage more people, if not in Pinole, but other networks that you guys personally have outside of this. I see it more as a metaphor, because the people in this setting, at least, don't just come from Pinole as well. So much to learn from this experience. So thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, Diana. And I hope you'll come visit us when you get your PhD and whatever degree comes after that. And when you're done traveling the world, come back and say hi to your friends in Pinole.
Of course.
And thank you very much, and get some rest. It's early in the morning where you are.
Yes, I'm speaking from the future at this point. So
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
It's nice to
Bye,
see
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you for attending.
Bye. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.